Hey everybody, it's Tom, and I'm coming to you this evening to follow up with another set of remarks upon Ivan Illich's tools for conviviality. And the last video we talked about the first chapter, which deals, amongst other things, with the problematic of any large-scale institution. Any institution will at first blush begin to address the problems which inspired its creation, but then there will arrive a moment, a watershed, as he terms it, Illich does, when instead of solving those problems, it actually tends to exacerbate those problems, perhaps in part because the solution needs the problem to perpetuate its existence. But that's not the only thing going on. It's simply sort of the broad brushstrokes of the first chapter. We turn to the second chapter today, which he entitled Convivial Reconstruction. And this is sort of some of the other things that are going on with the issues that he set out in the first chapter, highlighting as he does the problems of large-scale contemporary medicine, education, interstate highway systems, and so on. And it's a lengthy chapter, so it's not quite. It's around like 30 or 40. I think it's about 40 pages, and it's dense. And I wrestled a bit with what I was going to say because there's so much in it, and but enough procrastination. I'm just going to sort of extemporaneously try and recapitulate its major points. The first of which tries to get a little bit deeper into the reason why we have institutional crises at this segue. It's probably it's probably worthwhile for me to actually read from the paragraph itself, his actual words, and then just go from there. Bear with me. So I turn to the page in question. I know this cinematography is so raw, right? Man, I just, so thanks for your patience here. Okay, as I fiddle with the camera and the book. We are here. Alright. So. I will simply read the first paragraph. The symptoms of accelerated crisis are widely recognized. Multiple attempts have been made to explain them. I believe that this crisis is rooted in a major twofold experiment which has failed, and I claim that the resolution of the crisis begins with a recognition of the failure. For 100 years, we have tried to make machines work for men and to school men for life in their service. Now it turns out that machines do not quote-unquote work, and that people cannot be schooled for life at the service of machines. The hypothesis on which the experiment was built must now be discarded. The hypothesis was that machines can replace slaves. The evidence shows that, used for this purpose, machines enslave men. Neither a dictatorial proletariat nor a leisure mass can escape the dominion of constantly expanding industrial tools. And what really strikes me initially about that paragraph is that Ivan Illich is directly confronting a real fundament of the project of modernity, a fundament in its own conceptions of freedom and of our relationship with technology. The notion of the former is that freedom for the human being arises when they escape the boundaries of mere necessity. Real, basal, physical, and psychological exigency. The tendency to, thus, for modernity, in looking over history, is to then see the extent to which, in the past, people were bound by physical and psychological exigency as characteristic of epochs which were not fully human. The great gospel of modernity is that through the use of scientific investigation, we can realize a level of technological sophistication that harnesses the forces of nature in a fashion which then frees us from those historical exigencies, those historical necessities. And the chief manner in which that technology has evolved is in the form of industrial production, especially scaled industrial production. Notably, Illich is adamant on the point that this level of industrial production is not itself a function of either capitalist or, and he's writing this in the middle to late 60s, socialist, and what he means by socialist, because he's writing in the 60s, a kind of Stalinist Soviet project, right? Neither of these modes of economy, which were the two dominant forms of economy at the time of this work's text, would escape the problematic that he identifies as attending to scaled industrial production, which was founded in this conception of needing to escape nature to realize human freedom, and thus having to enslave nature to realize human freedom. The problem is that scaled industrial production ends up making human beings essentially just appendages to the process. Rather than being the ends, they are the means. And human beings become the victim of this problem of institutional hypertrophy that had been laid out in the first chapter. And this dependency manifests now not just in terms of actually how we go out and labor in the world, how our work lives have been subjugated to the logic of machinery. Its tendrils reach into how we conceive our own well-being and undermines our own capacities for autonomy, right? And so to give you like concrete examples, we can go back to some of the things that he already sketched in the first chapter that he recapitulates again in greater detail in the chapter itself. You can look at something like the highway system, which at first blush seems a very positive thing because it facilitates transport and so on, right? But a closer scrutiny of the system indicates that there are serious structural problems with it, not the least of which is the need for automobiles to go on the highway. And an automobile is not a simple machine. It's a machine that requires not just a certain level of sophistication to operate it, but a whole system of production to actually make, and then you have to distribute, and then there's gasoline and all the rest of it. And it ties us all into a dependency on a framework which ultimately nobody controls, right? There are people who benefit powerfully from that system, but nobody really controls that system. We have become the servants of that system of transportation. And other example, is a notable example again for Illich, is is education. Mass compulsory education ultimately deforms our relationship with learning by tying it to the reproduction of a particular sense of what human life should be, right? So these institutional dependencies arise, and these are sort of extensions of this notion of technology that we've already criticized. But what's the counterpoint? How do you deal with the situation? And what Illich posits is that you have to reconfigure your relationship with technology, and abandon the idea that we can simply use our tools, our machines, our institutions to unfetter us from the bounds of the physical world, nature, if you like. This is not mean by any stretch of the imagination that we then reject technology out of hand or tools out of hand. In fact, tools, Illich quite explicitly states, are fundamental to our relationship, to our very being as human beings, our relationship with the environment, the world, the Umwelt, and with each other. We mediate, we interact, we are mediated by, and we mediate the world through tools, through technology. Even language, I would say in a very qualified sense, is a kind of tool, right? But what's crucial about that process of mediation for Illich, and what he thinks we really need to take on in a very headway fashion if we're going to move beyond the impasse of he's writing in the 20th century, but unfortunately his prognoses were, I think, tragically prescient and highly relevant to this moment as I'm speaking toward the end of 2020. We have to take on, in very direct fashion, the proposition that if a tool, if a technology, if an institution does not actually foster autonomy, it should be rejected as ultimately contributing to the diminution of human being, our subjection to the very forces of necessity and even oppression which we are striving to escape. Now, the consequences of such a shift are obviously going to be radical in character. And additionally, what will be necessary is to exercise a profound cultural and emotional discipline in promulgating a shift beyond technologies which have made us heteronomous, dependent, to autonomous, and then more effectively social beings. Because when we're in a state of dependency, we are acting beneath ourselves, both for ourselves and for others. And so we need to set out various criteria as to distinguish between whether a tool or technology, an institution, sends us along one road or the other, autonomy or heteronomy. And that is the work of the next chapter, which is entitled the multiple balance, where he provides us with such criteria. But conviviality is the ideal at the heart of what he's discussing here. And since I opened with the sort of citation of the text, I think it perhaps would be meet of me to go ahead and conclude with one as well. And happily, I don't have to fumble quite as egregiously as I did last time. I have the text right here, right? where he defines conviviality. He says, I choose the term conviviality to designate the opposite of industrial productivity. I intended it to mean autonomous and creative intercourse among persons and the intercourse of persons with their environment, and this in contrast with the conditioned response of persons to demands made upon them by others and by a man-made environment. I consider conviviality to be individual freedom realized in personal interdependence, and as such an intrinsic ethical value. I believe that in any society, as conviviality is reduced below a certain level, no amount of industrial productivity can effectively satisfy the needs it creates among society's members. Now, I know I just said I was going to finish up with that, but as I read it, I feel compelled to add two further remarks about the content of the second chapter of Tools of Conviviality. The one is that he makes a point to indicate that, it's not just the level of technology which is involved in the production of a tool, or even its scale, which indicates whether it's fundamentally convivial or oppressive. It's subtler than that. But I want to give the example he gives of a larger scale but still structurally convivial technology is the telephone system, which pretty much anybody can use to communicate with pretty much anybody else, and that in a fashion which doesn't strictly foster pathological dependence. Now, he's writing that in the 60s. We have a somewhat interesting circumstance with regard to things like the internet and digital communication, which in part seem to share in the structural conviviality aforementioned. Nonetheless, that's not the whole story, because these same frameworks seem to have also created some very hazardous dependencies and even addictions that are feeding into the dysfunction of our society and our dysfunction is as individuals. So this is something which really needs to be teased out and worked out, and it may involve enriching the framework which Illich sets up, but I still think we will benefit from a sage consideration of the criteria that he offers in the subsequent chapter to clarify the matter. Right. The other thing that I want to make a point of noting is an interesting remark he has about management and relationship with authority, and what's involved in changing the world in which we live. And he said the problem with the notion that we can just change who's running the world and that's going to solve things is that it fails to appreciate the degree to which the management is simply an expression, a structural expression of this nefarious relationship with technology which we have allowed to set in. I guess I'll go ahead and quote the text again. Today's managers form a new class of men, selected for their character, competence, and interest, which enable them to both expand the productive society and promote the further operant conditioning of their clients. Today's managers form a new class of men, selected for their character, competence, and interests, which enable them to expand the productive society and promote the further operant conditioning of their children. They hold and manage power no matter who lives in the illusion that he owns the tools. This class of power holders must be eliminated, but this cannot be done by mass slaughter, or replacement. The new elite would only claim more legitimacy in the manipulation of the inherited structured power. Management can be done away with only by eliminating the machinery that makes it necessary, and therefore the demands for output that gives it sway. In a convivial society, there is little need for replacing the chairman of the board. So, there's a lot to unpack there, more than I really want to say at the moment, because we're running at 20 minutes. But what is, I think, perhaps most salient about that passage is that he's actually inviting us to reinvent how we consider the political. It actually reminds me of a distinction made by Murray Bookchin between what he terms statecraft and genuine politics. Most of what we indicate by the word politics in our culture is mere statecraft, as Bookchin terms it. And what do I mean by that? I mean that it's a professional management of a bureaucracy that more or less disseminates decisions that before which we are all supposed to be enthralled. And I mean, that's what we have. Whereas a genuine politics is one which really eschews this notion of top-down power distribution, decision relay, and conformity. It is, on the contrast, a culture of authentic communication in which we make the decisions that govern our own lives from the ground up. Bureaucratized politics, in a way, are just an expression of this fetishization of technology and tools after the model of industrial productivity. And a reimagined politics has to reject that logic of bureaucracy. And the cultural shift in question then will involve, I believe, and now I'm going to depart a little bit from Illich proper, forming spaces of community that are outside the bounds of conventional power structures. This is, something which actually can begin on a very, very, very simple, very quotidian, almost banal level, right? Even something as ordinary as founding a chess club or becoming more involved in your condo association or something to that effect can have a dramatic political dimension to it without even stating it as such, because it's an opportunity for sociality, for conviviality. And in the course of those small processes, I believe it will become possible to break the spell that has been cast over so much of our society regarding the legitimacy, if that's what you want to call it, of state and corporate actors. And the problem through all of this, I would emphasize, is the system. It's absolutely crucial that we don't fixate unduly on personality. part of the equation, but it's only a small part of the equation. It's crucial that we look at the sinews of the structures that we have allowed to displace engagement. So I'll leave it there for now, and I feel like I was slightly rambling. If that was the case, I apologize, but I wanted to get the video out there. And the next video, I think, will be less formal in aspect, more concrete. The third chapter, the multiple balance. Alright guys, I will talk to you soon, and thank you for listening. Bye.